It's the Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
This is a book that really asks hard questions, and then it asks something harder. It asks us to develop the courage of asking hard questions ourselves, and that's what I love about it.
And now here's the stars of our show, my mum and dad.
We talk about all kinds of things on the Happy Families podcast, but there's one thing in particular that I just love to do, and this is only the second time we've done it, but I'm so pumped for it. Book club. Well, it's not technically book club, but Kylie and I love to read. We read as many books as we can possibly squeeze into our lives while we're trying to do everything else. And Kylie, Mrs. Happy Families, it's back. It's been a month since we talked about it. Last month was kind of funny between some quite provocative titles and a book that you loved that I hated. We generated a fair bit of conversation around what books are good and what books are not. Today, we're going to do it again with a couple of books that we've been reading over the last month or so since our last podcast that we think we need to talk about. And I should highlight as well, we're not necessarily sharing with you books that we've loved. We're literally just sharing the books we're reading. So it's difficult as it might be, we might say some things about books that we don't love. Like I couldn't stand that book. I'm not even going to say what it was last month that you loved. So, Kylie, why don't you start us off? What have you been reading that you think everybody needs to know that you've been reading?
So one of the books that I have just recently read is by Amy Taylor Kabbaz called Mama Rising.
Yeah, I love Amy. She's great.
And I actually wrote a blog post.
Yeah, you did.
About it.
Yeah, for our Happy Families premium members, yeah.
And she reintroduced me to the word matrescence. Have you heard of it before?
Only because I know Amy's work. So matrescence is kind of like the equivalent of adolescence. So adolescence, trying to work out who you are because you're growing into an adult. Matrescence is like, now I'm a mum and I'm trying to figure out who I am because my identity changes again, or a dad for that matter.
Yeah, and this idea that once you become a mum, you actually never leave that stage of discovery because you're changing all the time. And so
that kind of ties in with what we were talking about with the Dad Rage, the Parenting Rage podcast we did a couple of days ago on Tuesday, when we were talking about how parenting is self-discovery.
Yeah, and it was such a simple, simplistic read, very, very easy to get through. So for any time-poor parent who's kind of going, how am I going to get through books? This was just a really easy read.
So Amy used to be a journalist, which is why she communicates so clearly. She really knows how to take a thought and convey it with clarity.
And I loved what she said. We grow up believing that when we have a baby, we become a mother. Like giving birth lands us at destination mother. But motherhood, that's a whole other story. It's not so much a destination as it is a stage of life, maybe even more aptly described as a way of being. Matrescence, like adolescence, is the emergence of a whole new identity, physical, emotional, societal, spiritual. It starts with the very first thought of pregnancy and does not really ever end. But until now, we've ignored the massive shifts with a woman and have assumed she'll go back to who she used to be, just with mother added to the list of what she does. And what I loved about that was I watch it all the time. I got to baby number 3 before it really hit me that I couldn't actually do what I used to be able to do with one child or before I had children. And it was such, I'm going to say, an identity crisis moment in my life where it was like, well, if I can't do that, then what am I capable of doing? Am I capable of doing anything? Is there anything noteworthy in what I'm doing? Because I loved what I was able to do back then, but didn't feel like anything I was doing at that point with now 3 children under tow had the same impact or the same magnitude.
Which is really surprising to say, because when we spoke about how we would grow our family, you've always said all I've ever wanted to do was be a mum. You've been fairly upfront about saying I didn't really have career aspirations. I really just wanted to be a mum. And yet here you are as mum and saying, but who am I now? Like, what does this mean? And I can't do what I used to do. So what does that mean about who I am and my capacity and all that sort of thing? So I love that insight.
Well, what I love about this idea of matrescence is just this acknowledgement. I wish I had have known this so many years ago and recognized just the journey that being a mother is, and recognize that every part of it is normal. All of the feelings that you have as a mum are normal.
I'm starting to smile to myself as I consider the size of the pile of books that our children are going to get from us when they become parents. It's like, oh, you got to read this one, you got to read that one. It sounds to me like this book, Mama Rising by Amy Taylor Kabbaz, will be one that you would want to stick in that pile.
Yeah, I think so. I finished my blog and I just said, if only I knew all those years ago that all of it is normal. All my fears, all my doubts, all my unknowing, my inability, my confusion, all of it. It's not a sign of my lack of, my incompetence, my failure to be. It's the new me emerging, learning, growing, becoming.
How many stars, Kylie?
I'm going to give it 4.
4 stars out of 5?
Yeah.
Okay. Mama Rising, Amy Taylor Kabbaz. I'm going to be speaking with Amy a little later this year with some pretty cool stuff that's coming up. So you weren't aware of that until right now, but I'm just letting you know there's more from Amy coming for the Happy Families community. I'm going to throw in 2 books really quickly in this first half of our book club because I've been doing a lot of reading. I read a novel for fun. I don't very often read novels. I tend to be a non-fiction guy rather than a fiction guy, but I read a book by Taylor Jenkins Reid called Malibu Rising, and then I handed it to you. I mean, it's pretty raw. In some places, it's actually kind of hard to read. We're a non-coarse language kind of family. We prefer to keep things kind of G or PG rated, I guess, but this one is definitely not that. This one is a pretty raw book, but in terms of novels and in terms of compelling reads, this was unputdownable. Not even a word, but I'm giving it 5 stars. Malibu Rising, Taylor Jenkins Reid. It's a fictional story about a family with a superstar dad who basically leaves them, a mum who turns to alcohol, and I won't talk too much about what happens with her, but the 3 adult kids are trying to piece their lives together, and dad shows up right at the end, right when everything is absolutely blowing up. It's an incredibly good book. I loved it. Be warned for some of the content if you have a soft disposition like we tend to, but 5 stars because it was so well written, so compelling.
The way Jenkins Reid weaved all of these different lives and storylines into one.
All those threads into a tapestry.
Yes.
Oh, it was amazing.
To the very end.
Yeah. I was going to do 2, but it's time for a break. After the break, I've got 2 more. You've got 1 more. It's Book Club on the Happy Families podcast. If you have more than one child, there's a simple truth. They're going to fight, they're going to compete, and they're going to have relationship troubles. But the real secret isn't how to stop the fighting, it's how to teach them kindness. The Teaching Kids Kindness webinar will help you to do just that, but also help them build lifelong sibling bonds that lead to lifelong friendships. Check out Teaching Kids Kindness at happyfamilies.com.au.
It's the Happy Families podcast, the podcast for the time poor parent who just wants answers now.
I'm going first.
I can't believe it. You're always just trying to,
Well, no, it's because I've read more books.
Is that what it is?
I've been doing a lot of reading. And do you know what? I've got another couple of books that I'm almost finished for next month's book club already. I'm so excited to tell you about them, but they have to wait until next month. This is
all right. What's your other 2?
This is July book club. August book club.
Overachiever.
Awesome. Okay, so the next one is a book by one of my favourite academics. The guy's name is Professor Todd Kashdan. I've been involved in correspondence with Todd now for probably 10 or 15 years. Great guy, absolute crack up. He's a really counterintuitive kind of thinker. He's a really probing kind of thinker. And he wrote a book that came out a little bit earlier this year. It took me a bit to get to it. The book is called The Art of Insubordination. The Art of Insubordination. So there's a whole lot of books. In fact, I had many of them on my bookshelf until I did a cull recently. Books like Raising Rebels, all of these kinds of books about challenging the status quo and why we need to be courageous and get in the habit of asking hard questions. But none of the books have been really that good, which is why I culled them. Todd Kashdan, though, is one of those unique thinkers who I think really courageously asks questions about hard topics a lot of people would rather avoid. And this is a book that really asks hard questions, and then it asks something harder. It asks us to develop the courage of asking and the habit of asking hard questions ourselves, questions that matter, but doing it in a principled way. And that's what I love about it. So there are 3 things that this book does supremely well. The first is that he weaves these extraordinary stories that demand that you just keep on reading. Often people will pull a story out and they'll tell you a story to illustrate a point. But Todd's done such a great job with this. My favourite story, the one that jumps out at me as I'm reflecting on the book, there's the NBA player who shoots free throws granny style.
I remember you telling me this.
At more than 94% accuracy. But so granny style is like you hold the ball between your legs and then you throw it up towards the hoop, like granny wearing the skirt.
It's a bit hard to do that though when you're kind of full momentum racing down the track.
Oh, no, we're talking about a free throw.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so yeah, free throws.
Not in the middle of a game.
No, free throws. So he's got 94% accuracy, but everyone else does the overhead free throw shots.
Because it looks cooler.
Yeah, that's right. And this guy's bucking the trend, but he's shooting at 94%. The very best free throwers, I mean, Shaq was not a good free thrower, but he landed about 50%, 40 to 50%. And the very, very good ones usually land somewhere between 70 and 80%. If you're above 80%, it's outstanding. And this guy's at 94%, but nobody will do it, even though it's more accurate, because they don't want to look silly. In other words, they're not willing to insubordinate the status quo, the norm. Just one player is willing to do it. I think that's a compelling story. Then there's a story of the questions that arose after the tragic accidental death of the first female US Air Force fighter pilot. There was a rebellion by a New Yorker by the name of Elizabeth Jennings in an act of racial insubordination 100 years before Rosa Parks on the bus. An amazing, really fun story about punk rockers Fugazi, I guess it depends on who you are and how you want to say it. Like, there are literally a dozen stories that I've never read before. Typically when you pick up these kinds of books, you hear a lot of the same stories. People really rely on the same stuff that's out there. And I loved it because the stories were unique, but they were so well told. The second thing, I know I'm waffling, I need to hurry up. The second thing was that he's such a great scientist that he integrates the very best psychological science with those stories, science that you haven't read about in other books. You're not going to hear the same stuff that everyone else writes about and talks about and copies and continues to inculcate into this saturated psychology bookshelf. This stuff's original, and I love it, and it's provocative, and it's hitting the right notes. And the third thing that I love is just the momentum. It's not one of those books that makes you think, I'll read some more later. I should just check my email now. It's one of those books that it makes you feel like the kids are probably going to have to get dinner for themselves, because you just want to keep on reading one more chapter. So the upshot, Professor Todd Kashdan, outstanding book, The Art of Insubordination, taking complicated science and making it accessible and practical and real and telling us why we should be more insubordinate. 5 stars.
5 stars? You've been handing them out so easy
I've
lately.
been picking. No, it's not an easy thing to get a 5-star review from me.
It's not with you usually, but you keep throwing them out.
This was a great book.
My last book for today is called The Anatomy of Peace by the Arbinger
5 stars.
Institute.
That's one of my favourites from years ago. I saw that on your bookcase, on your bookshelf.
What I love about the way the Arbinger Institute writes is it's literally first-person novel style writing.
Yeah,
it's like you're actually right there sitting as it's all unfolding.
So it's fictional, but it's teaching principles.
And this one is specifically focused on this idea that whether we are at war or peace is actually within each of us. The way we respond, the way we think, the way we articulate will prove whether or not we're actually at war with somebody or at peace with them.
Yeah.
It was extremely, in some cases, actually quite confronting to read it, as I was able to kind of look at different relationships in my life and see where at times I have felt at war but have felt justified in my response and therefore seen it as someone else's problem, not mine.
Yeah.
So that was really, really confronting to actually sit back and look at myself.
It's a book that changes you.
It really is a book for anyone who wants to understand themselves more and to have greater peace in their lives.
Yeah, I love it. The Anatomy of Peace by the Arbinger Institute. How many stars are you giving that one?
That was a 5.
Yeah. See, look at you handing out 5-star reviews as well. What's in your heart? Are you at war with someone or are you at peace with them? That's really what it comes down to. And it's such a great parenting book. Like, it's not actually a parenting book.
It's not a parenting book, but in every relationship in your life, you can see how these I guess principles and values play out. And so, you know, when you look at your children and the way you respond to them, Are you at war with them or are you at peace? You know, they're just trying to destroy your world, or are they little human beings who are trying to work it all out?
I've got to dive in with the last one really quickly.
No, you're not.
Jennifer Traig has written a book. Is your heart at peace with me right now?
No, it is not right now.
Jennifer Traig has written a book called Act Natural. Act Natural, a cultural history of misadventures in parenting. And I think, Kylie, that this might just be my book of the year. So I'm obviously going to give it 5 stars. We haven't even started the review, but I think this might be my book of the year. I've picked some crackers and I loved this book. I reckon Jennifer Traig probably spent approximately forever, maybe a little bit longer than forever, researching the history of how people have been raising, or unfortunately, this is going to sound really morbid, or killing their children for the past couple of thousand years. The work that has gone into this book is simply extraordinary. She is a historian, and it shows. It's inspired me so much. She writes with this really sassy, really fun tone, sometimes a little bit too much sass. If I was going to say anything, maybe 4.9 out of 5 instead, but it's always so much fun, and she's self-deprecating, and it's delightful. Surprises on every single page. Stories about swaddling children and how crawling was forbidden and why the term parenting didn't exist until the 1950s, and things like how little parents actually parented until the last 150 years. Wet nurses, the way that people lived, why toilet training didn't exist, how fussy eating only came to be a thing in the last 100 years or so, and the extraordinary characters who have written books that have ultimately informed the way that we parent, like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the Frenchman, who never actually wrote about parenting, but is one of the most influential parenting experts, despite leaving his 5 kids at the orphanage so that he could concentrate on writing his novels, which ended up becoming parenting tomes. This book is one that I could go on about forever and ever and ever. I love this book.
I'm not letting you go on forever and ever and
awesome.
ever.
Act Natural, a cultural history of misadventures in parenting by Jennifer Traig. 5 stars. I love the book. We're going to link to all 5 of these books in the podcast show notes. Good luck keeping up with us, but please hire them, borrow them, buy them, do whatever it is to support authors who are writing books that are worth reading. Those 5 books again: Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid, that was the novel; Mama Rising by Amy Taylor Kabaz; The Art of Insubordination by Todd Kashdan; and Act Natural, a cultural history of misadventures in parenting by Jennifer Traig. Kylie, I can't wait to hear what you've read next month.
The pressure's on now.
The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rowland for Bridge Media, and Craig Bruce is our executive producer. If you'd like more info about the stuff we talked about, check the show notes for today's podcast, or to find out how you can make your family happier, we would love for you to visit us at happyfamilies.com.au.